Hey everyone, welcome to another edition of the Daily Bullet Second Amendment Foundation's interview series where we talk with people who are making a difference in our Second Amendment rights. Joining us today, Lauren Hartnett. Lauren is a bit of a unicorn. She's pro Second Amendment, lives in New York City. I think she's one of 8 people there that are actually pro gun. But the reason I wanted to talk to you today, Lauren, is twofold. I think we're going to have a wide-ranging discussion. First thing I want to bring up is you are a paramedic in New York City, and that has got to be an extremely interesting job. You get to see, well, I want to say you get to see both the best and the worst of society in your job.
Yes, I definitely get to see the best and the worst, and I also get to do, the best that a lot of people don't get to see. People call 911 because they're having a good day. Usually, it's because they're having a really bad one. So when I can get there and I can make a difference in somebody, and it's got that immediate return factor where I come in, I recognize the problem, I correct the problem, and it's actually a really cool feeling to be able to do that and to be able to legitimately work at saving somebody's life.
Where this ties into the Second Amendment and the right to keep and bear arms is the city of New York does not allow paramedics or EMTs or anybody in emergency medical to be armed when they're on the job, do they?
No, it's been a nationwide debate. Actually, it's not just here in New York City. It has been a bit of a debate within the EMS community itself, just because where do we draw the line? Like, are we're helping people, and then if we decide that we're going to carry a firearm, does that automatically now switch us to a different level? Does that, besides all the training, just how the public is going to view us? Normally, we are welcomed into people's homes and we're welcomed into people's lives because we're there to save them, and we have that ability of not being that quote unquote threat factor, or we're not posing a threat to them. And a lot of people have felt that if we did begin carrying firearms, that now we take that away, and now we're no longer helping. Now we're there, and they're not our priority anymore, and we've all taken an oath to do no harm. So it's been a huge debate in just the EMS community alone, politics aside. So there's some of us who are very, very pro carrying, and there are some of us who are like, I want nothing to do with it. And I don't want that responsibility, and I don't think that that's EMS's responsibility. And when you look at EMS as a system as a whole, it's still very, very new. We really only started coming about, and most of our training and tactics, ironically enough, has come from the military and how we treat emergent situations and emergency medical situations, because the first place that it was really implemented was on the battlefield. But now it's switched to that, well, we're not on the battlefield anymore, and we're not just doing traumatic medicine. Now we're doing actual emergency medicine. We're dealing with cardiac patients and respiratory patients and stroke patients. So why do we need to carry a gun? And then you hear instances where EMS crews are walking into scenes and we're getting ambushed, or they know that we're vulnerable. They know that we have no means of self-defense. So we're now a soft target for them. The only thing that we really have between us and the outside is a radio. And in New York City, good luck if in some of those places they work.
Yeah, we were talking before we started recording, and one would think that in New York City, 2 things would be almost universal: cell phone coverage and the ability for radios to work. And unfortunately, that's not always the case.
No. Where I live in Staten Island, my cell phone, I can't use my phone unless I'm on Wi-Fi in my own house. So you would think, again, with cell phone coverage, it's the same. But yeah, and just the structure of the buildings, especially in Manhattan, we're underground a lot, or we're high and there's steel buildings, so there's interference, and as many radio repeaters as we put up, unfortunately, sometimes it's not enough. So you're on your
Well,
own.
and we'll move on here in just a few minutes, but I want to bring up one other thing, and this is nationwide. I've noticed this being a former EMT myself, although it was a very tiny department in a very rural area of South Dakota. There are instances where false calls are made to 911, and the goal of those calls is to get somebody to respond and then rob them or worse. And I can't imagine that doesn't happen in New York City.
Right. So this actually just recently happened twice in New York City to two EMS crews. There were calls set up specifically to draw in an EMS crew, and our response system is very catered to what the call is. So there's sometimes if you make a call and you tell somebody that a person's in cardiac arrest, you're going to get 11 people showing up to that cardiac arrest. It's not just going to be one crew. If you call 911 and say that, my stomach hurts, you're only going to get two people. You're not going to get any more than that. So however these two calls were put in, they were specifically set up so that two EMTs would come in, and they were then robbed at gunpoint for their radio and for their equipment. So they're still trying to figure out all the specifics and if they're linked, and it's an ongoing investigation. But there's, these things happen, and it doesn't just happen here. It's happening all over the country. And we are a very vulnerable service. So, like I said, we're welcomed into everybody's homes. People call us, we show up. We're guaranteed to show up. So we are a very vulnerable, soft target at times.
Sure. So here's another area, I think, Lauren, where you're a bit of a unicorn. Not only are you a pro Second Amendment person in New York City, you're a firearms trainer, for heaven's sake.
I am.
How does that work? How can you train somebody to work with firearms in New York City?
So it's a very difficult, long process. It's also a twofold process for me, because a lot of people in New York City don't believe you can actually own a firearm. So I come out of the gate with them with the education and the knowledge that I've gained over the last 11 years of doing this. So it's like, no, here's what you have to go through. It's a very long, lengthy process. It tends to be a very expensive process. However, it's a doable process. Where I am in Staten Island, out of all of the 5 boroughs of the city, we actually hold the most premise permits in the city for pistols. So a lot of Staten Island is armed, and if you ever looked at an election map, you'd probably see why. But Staten Island is a unicorn in itself to New York City. So when I start that process and start educating them and then introducing them to other types of programs like Refuse to be a Victim programs or pepper spray classes, or just other situational awareness and self-defense classes, it really opens them up to saying like, oh, okay, like this is something that I want to do. And given the last year that's been going on with COVID, we struggled a lot with that, because we had people home from work, first responders in the city were leaving their families for longer periods of time. Their wives or husbands were at home working from home. Their kids were at home. We were all told as essential workers, if you have anything that's identifying you're still getting a paycheck, you might want to remove that, whether it's a parking placard or a sticker, because we didn't know if people were going to be getting paychecks or not still. So, you might want to remove that, because they might start looting and trying to steal your food or steal your money or whichever it is. So these instances became very real for people. And I was like, this is an opportunity to now educate people and to educate the citizens of New York City, and saying this is why you just need to start taking the steps to defend yourself and to defend your family. This is why the Second Amendment exists. It's not just for that right to bear arms. It's everything that comes with it. It's the right that you have to protect yourself, protect your family, to be your own first responder. I'm not always going to get there in time. The police are not always going to get there in time. More than likely, they won't get there in time. If you've already called us, it's too late. So to be able to have that now platform where people's minds were already opened up because of the current situation, now it was a perfect opportunity to say, listen, this is what I do. Like, let me help you. And the amount of people whose permits I've helped them apply for has been definitely gone up over the last 9 months during the pandemic.
So if somebody, now I want to be clear about this. Just to have a handgun in New York City, you have to go through the permitting process. That we're not talking
Yes.
carrying, we're talking having one in your house.
Correct. They don't. We are a May issue, so we won't get a carry permit unless you can prove need, which usually has to deal with monetary need. But you can own and possess in your home, travel to and from ranges, travel to and we recently just got that rule overturned where now we can leave the city with it. We could go upstate. We can go to countering cities, neighboring states, or wherever we are legally allowed to possess a firearm. So that was a big win for the city. But yeah, this is not to be able to carry. This is just to be able to protect in your home. And the way that I see it is, well, now that I've introduced this to people and now that people have been learning, well, now they're going to get more upset as to, well, I could do this in my home. Why can't I do this out? I want to do this outside of my home. I want to do this when I'm going to the grocery store. I want to be able to protect my family when I'm going to the mall or when I'm going out with my family once everything opens up again. But so how do I do that? And then that's where the advocacy comes in. The advocacy usually tends to come in greater numbers when people are told now that they can't do something after they're trying to be able to do something.
Sure. So step one of change is to get enough people interested in change that they reach out to governmental places and demand that change. If enough people are getting a hold of their city council persons, then change will eventually happen.
Yes, I believe. Long term in New York, but
yeah,
we'll get there.
Sure. So, is there for getting the permit to have a firearm in your home in New York City? Is there a live fire requirement? Is there training required? It's all in just putting up the money and going through the long, arduous process.
Yep. It's $340 for the application fee, $85 for the fingerprint fee, and then I think they're up to about 18 months in processing because of everybody working from home because they're non-essential. So they've all been working at home, and before that it was usually about 8-9 months, and then it's $340 every 3 years, and you have to reapply as a renewal, but you basically have to completely and totally reapply for the permit altogether. And then after you get approved, you have 30 days to purchase your first firearm and put it onto your permit. And the problem with that is you are not allowed to touch a pistol in New York State unless you have a permit. So now you give this person 30 days with no prior experience, no ability to have prior experience, no ability to even go to the store and look at one or research, and unless you go to a different state. None of that. And now you're sending this uneducated person and telling them you have 30 days now to pick a gun, spend the money, and put it on your permit. And then you could do whatever you want.
So that brings to mind the next question is, when I very first got a handgun, I thought I knew what I was doing. And because my wife was a little concerned, I went to a class because I wanted to ease her mind, and then I realized I only thought I knew what I was doing. So, if for somebody in New York, they've got to have a permit before they ever can touch a firearm. Are there ranges? How does someone get training if they live in New York City and they want to know how to use a firearm effectively?
A lot of times they'll go to Jersey because it's a little bit easier and you can rent handguns in Jersey. In New York, in the city, there's very limited amounts of clubs and of ranges, and they're all private except for one. And they're not allowed to rent. You're only allowed to rent 22 long rifles. So what I've been telling people is I'll take people out to Jersey. I'll train them in Jersey. I'll get them familiar. I'll start them with the process. I'll walk somebody through the process completely free. I'm not going to charge somebody to help them fill out an application. I don't believe in that, but I will help somebody step by step fill out the application process, make sure that, they're speaking with their investigator just so that everything goes smoothly. And in the interim, get them to the range as much as I can, encourage them to go to other partnering ranges in New Jersey where you are able to rent, and then either I'll go with them, and then once they get their permits, come to me and we'll do some formal training. We'll work with your gun. We'll work with what you have now, and we'll get you comfortable. We'll get you on the range. We will get you to a point where you feel safe having this in your home and you feel safe and comfortable using it.
Very cool. We're coming quickly up on the time that we have today. Before we go, though, is there anything I know? Let's touch on this. One other thing that makes you unique is you're part of a 50-member group, and that's the DC Project. You want to talk about them for just a couple minutes?
Sure. The DC Project started off as a woman representative from every state in the country, and we would go and meet in DC every year and speak to our legislators about the Second Amendment, and we would educate and we would become a resource for them. And recently we took this to the state level now. So what we were doing in DC, we realized was as effective as we could be in DC, we could be just as effective in our home states, which a lot of times is where we need most of the work done. So now I am the state leader for New York, and we do the same thing. I'll gather women around the New York area and in the state of New York, and we'll comprise and plan a trip to go to Albany and speak with our legislators and lawmakers in Albany, and then encourage women. This is how you can get involved. This is how we can make a difference. And we need your stories. We need your knowledge. We need your education. And more importantly, we need your voice to make this happen. And becoming this stronghold of women that is, I don't want to say busting down doors, but we're walking into lawmakers' offices and saying, this is why this is important to us, and this is why you need to listen to us. We're the ones who are out there. We're the ones who are hurt, and we relate to these lawmakers on a different level. And we've obviously now with COVID, everything is shut down, but throughout the country and throughout all the other states with the DC Project, it's been quite effective. So go to dcproject.info and get a blue shirt and come meet us at our rally.
There you go. Lauren, we are all out of time, but I want to thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Paul, for having me.
All right, folks, if you don't mind, please subscribe to the channel. When you do, hit the notification bell so you know when we'll be releasing another video. Thanks for watching.